by next year.
Hello. Mark,
A coalition of industrial investors committed to
drag him out from the back
decarbonize
and bring him in the front.
$100 billion by December 2015 and to measure and disclose the carbon footprint of at least $500 billion.
Filibuster put up the closing address at the climate summit with all with the Secretary General making all the things, but we can switch that off in a second. Just very quickly, this is a very sort of opportune conjunction of a whole range of processes. So we have in the room today some of the best people in India who worked on climate questions now for maybe 2.5, sometimes 3 decades. And we have a wonderful collection of colleagues from all over Africa, from the UK and the US, who've been working very hard over the last 3 or 4 days to try and get a sense of this sort of complex engagement we have looking at climate adaptation across these 2 regions. So I just thought very, very quickly, literally, 10 seconds each, if we can do a quick round of who's whom, at least we get a sense of what's happening in the room. We need to get on to the session, so we don't want to make this too long. So if you people can just hand it on the mics, it'll give us a sense of what's happening. Yeah. So.
I am Ravindranath Ravi from Indian Institute of Science.
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Ramesh from the Ministry of Earth Sciences. I am advisor there.
Purnamita from Institute of Economic Growth, Delhi.
Yeah. My name is C.H. Srinivasarao. I am Director at Central Research Institute for Dryland Agriculture, Hyderabad.
Good afternoon. I am S. Naresh Kumar from Indian Agriculture Research Institute, New Delhi. Thank you.
My name is Murli. I work as Program Officer at International Development Research Center, New Delhi.
Divya from A3.
Dr. M.K. Ramesh, Professor, National Law School of India University.
Muddathir from CSAG in New City. I'm from Sudan. Thank you.
Hi, Judy Sakruza, Rayos, South Africa.
I'm Muhammad Hassan from Ethiopia, Addis Ababa University, working on climate crop studies.
I'm Jagdish Krishnaswamy from the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, Bangalore.
Hi, I'm Danny McGay. I'm working for the African Wildlife Foundation on conservation programming and climate change.
I am Margaret Angura from the University of Namibia.
I'm Maiteo Bolane from the University of Botswana. I'm from Botswana.
I'm Geeta Lakshmi from Tamil Nadu Agricultural University, working mainly on climate change related issues with respect to agriculture.
I'm Joseph Down from the Climate System Analysis Group, University of Cape Town, South Africa.
Mark New from the Climate and Development Initiative at the University of Cape Town, South Africa.
I am Bhuvarna from Tamil Nadu Agriculture University, Coimbatore.
I'm Vishnupriya from Tamil Nadu Agriculture University.
Appiya Bhattacharya, Science Correspondent, New Indian Express.
I'm Sujata Bhairavan and I work with C-STEP in Bangalore.
I'm Ulka Kelka with the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI in Bangalore.
My name is Sanjay Sridhar. I work for the C40 Climate Leadership Group. I'm the Regional Director for South and West Asia.
I am Guru Prasad, former Chief Engineer, Water Resources Development Organization, Bangalore.
I'm Suresh Kumar from Tamil Nadu Agricultural University, Coimbatore, India.
Hi, my name is Venkatachalam. I am from Madras Institute of Development Studies, Chennai.
Good afternoon. My name is Jesse. I'm the Climate Change Adaptation Program Coordinator at Oxfam Great Britain.
Hi, I'm Gina Seervogel from the Department of Environmental and Geographical Science at University of Cape Town.
Hi, I'm Sophie Lashford. I work for Intersave and I come from the UK.
I'm S.S. Shegde, Senior Hydrogeologist from Central Groundwater Board, Government of India, Bangalore.
I'm H.P. Jayaprakash.
Scientist, Central Groundwater Board, Bangalore.
Good afternoon, I am Bharai Dasan, Secretary, Arulagam NGO.
Milind Banyan from the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, Bangalore.
Hi, I'm Salma Hega from Tanzania. I'm based in the southern region, working with the University of Cape Town.
Hello, I'm Manita. I'm from IIC Bangalore.
Hello, I'm Colleen Magna from Rios in Johannesburg.
Hello, I'm Pusindra Satyal from the School of International Development in the University of East Anglia, Norwich, UK.
Good afternoon. I'm Dave Lopser. I'm from the African Wildlife Foundation based in Nairobi, Kenya.
I'm Nambi from the World Resources India office. I head the climate change program, WRI.
I'm Julius Kamau, working for Intersafe, and I'm from Kenya.
I'm Jennifer Levy. I'm from the School of International Development at the University of East Anglia, UK.
Hello, I'm Helen Jeans, also from the UK, working with Oxfam.
Blaine Harvey. I'm a Senior Program Officer with the International Development Research Centre in Canada.
Good afternoon, I'm Nitya Rao, working with the School of International Development at the University of East Anglia.
Good afternoon, my name is Luciesco Danipio. I work with the University of Cape Town in South Africa.
My name is Kishore Bhatt. I'm an independent researcher in Bangalore.
Hello there, Roger Few, University of East Anglia, UK.
Hello, I'm Edmond Totti, working for IIHS from Benin.
Hello, I'm Bhavna from Watershed Organization Trust, Pune, Maharashtra.
Hi, I'm Srinivas Bediga, working with Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment in Bangalore.
Hello, I'm Marcela D'Souza from Watershed Organization Trust, Pune.
My name is Adlina Mensah. I'm from Ghana with the University of Ghana.
My name is Elaine Lawson, also from the University of Ghana, Accra, Ghana.
I'm Chandni Singh and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at IIHS.
Hussain from IIT Bangalore.
I'm Ritvika, I'm interning at IIHS.
Good afternoon, I'm Sibiri Traore with ICRISAT in Bamako, Mali.
Hello, my name is Diane Spear and I'm at the African Climate and Development Initiative at the University of Cape Town in South Africa.
Hi everybody, I'm Andalip, IIHS Bangalore.
I'm Ram Kumar, I'm with the Watershed Organization Trust, Maharashtra.
I am Manjunath Hebbar from Prajavani.
Hi, myself Rajiv from ISC and IHS.
I'm Krishnan from Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, Pune.
I'm Sanjay from Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, Pune.
Range of people in the room. We have quite a diverse set of people here. As Mark was just saying just now, we're getting worried by the diversity in the room. We've been working very hard over the last 3 days to get a sense of how we can structure this kind of a process. So we actually have a remarkably good panel, so I won't sort of sit between you and them. We have at least, I had promised our colleagues from Africa and other parts of the world that we would bring at least 3 CLAs of the current assessment here, and we have them in, apart from, the sort of lead person who's in charge of this process as far as the government of India is concerned. But before we get into that, I just thought I'd share a couple of things with you. Can I just put up that presentation for a second? And I had this up because a week ago, about a little bit more than a week ago, I was at the Climate Summit in New York, and that's the Secretary General making his sort of speech and stuff like that. But the more important thing is, for those of us who work in this space now for a couple of decades or more, and have found things really badly stuck. I'm sort of known for speaking very frankly. Things have not been going very well. I mean, some of us have been in this process starting from onset and maybe slightly before that. Things have not been going well, whether it's Bali or Copenhagen and even Warsaw. But for the first time in some time now, one was seeing a little bit of progress in the run-up to Peru, to the Lima COP, and of course to Paris. Some of us have been involved both in the mitigation and the adaptation side. And the reason, one could say that is, partially here in what he's saying and in this slide. This is sort of the outcome. That's what the SG was talking about there. So what happened? We had 100 heads of state in the room, which was a significant achievement because it was just before the UN General Assembly. Unfortunately, we didn't have either the Chinese president or the Indian Prime Minister. That was, I think, a great loss in some senses because the opportunity of moving forward really lies with both our countries at the current point of time. Obama was there, and he made a nice speech as he normally does, but to be very frank, he didn't say very much in terms of commitment. So, in that sense, in that troika, because the EU has maintained its own position, and you can see it very clearly up there, is where the real opportunity lies, apart from the rest of us who work and come from LDCs, SIDS, and other kinds of stuff. So I guess the beginning of what I hope is a big shift in the discourse is the question of holding to the 2 degree. Because one of the most important messages that we came out from, the IPCC has been accused of being conservative, and in some senses maybe we are. Because if you look at the IPCC scenarios and you look at where we might be pretty much going, if nothing dramatically happens, both in the OECD world and also in India, and certainly in China, is moving from beyond a 2 degree to a 4 degree world, right? And for those of us who are not into the science business, it's a 4 degree, a mean 4 degree world, which means at the extremes you're dealing with a hell of a lot more than that. And that's what the climate science does. So I think the shift in discourse, or the beginning of the shift in discourse, was saying that we will hold to the 2. Now, holding to the 2 means dramatic shifts in terms of the energy system, in terms of decarbonization, in terms of consumption, a whole range of other processes. And especially, as I said upstairs, since we now have a convergence with the Sustainable Development Goal process, which is in a sense setting targets for national development for all the countries in the world, there is an opportunity in the next 18 months for maybe something happening. And I'm saying may because we've been continually disappointed in the last 3 years, where we've almost come this far. There have been high-level summits with the leaders of most of the important nations in the world, and we've not been able to close. That's one thing. The other thing which sort of slipped into the discussion, and this is something which I think personally is very difficult to actually achieve, was peaking in 2020. Now, we are 6 years from 2020. Peaking in 2020 means, in some senses, you have to give up on fracking, you have to give up on Arctic oil, you have to give up on all deep sea exploration of hydrocarbons, which is a serious question because it's an economic question for some countries because their economies depend on that, and for others, like the United States, which is now going to a situation where they, after many years, are going into a sort of energy secure as they look at it. I mean, some of us may look at it as very insecure situation. So that's another significant shift. The fact that it slipped in, and a number of countries have said, and we know who they are, that we may look at a peaking, even if the peaking happens in the mid-2020s itself, that itself would mean a significant shift. So that's the second thing that's there. The EU has maintained its clear stance. They're talking about 40% reductions by 2030. If you want to you want to really make a 2 degree world with any degree of certainty, it has to be deeper than that. But we've seen what has happened in Germany and Northern Europe. So there are obviously significant changes that are possible. And like the Europeans have been for a long time, they've made their commitments in terms of at least mitigation and somewhat less on the adaptation side. The money is on the place. The other thing that was very interesting, because having sitting in the room, was the question of carbon pricing. Seems to have got a little bit of traction. And I'm saying little bit because this has been one of the big issues in the current game at the moment. And the sense that one has, the reason that one might see that actually happening is because, at least in this summit, what the Secretary General was able to do through Michael Bloomberg, and it's interesting how these kind of connections work, was to bring together most of the really big private sector players in the game who have some alignments and interest in as far as climate is concerned. And I would say there are two things that sort of impacted that. One, of course, is people in the production chain, including in agriculture. And this was a big surprise. large agribusiness, the leaders of large agribusiness companies who may not have a significant impact on India directly, because agribusiness is not very big in India. It is in many other parts of the world. In Africa, it's, I guess, a very serious question. They've started looking at decarbonization, or some of them have made commitments about decarbonization of the entire supply chain. And that's a huge thing, because supply chains, the global supply chains are very large, whether it's coffee or tea, or even commodity crops, and also meat, which is a big question for some parts of the world. So that's one shift. The other shift which one saw potentially happening in the room was long-term finance institutions. So the pension funds, so one was sitting in a room where there were pension funds, at least 2 or 3 of them had almost about $2 trillion worth of investment under their control. They came up with what I've heard for the first time, a very interesting formulation. They said, look, our long-term investments are at risk if we don't actually start making a significant impact on the energy and the climate system. Now, I haven't heard this for a long time. And they made 2 requests, or rather they were making 2 conditionalities. The first thing is carbon pricing, which immediately means that one part of the financial industry is saying, look, the other part of it, and certainly the manufacturing side and the petrochemical and the hydrocarbon side are in trouble, saying carbon pricing. And the second thing that they were saying was the end of subsidies to hydrocarbons. Now, that's been an issue in India for a while, but from the economic side, I think that's a big shift. So you're seeing long-term capital saying, look, all that we're doing in terms of infrastructure, in terms of development is at risk, because I think the message is getting across, the message that came out from AR5, I mean the big one, and that is, look, it's not only the question of a 4-degree world, there are real limits to adaptation. There are real limits to adaptation, we have evidence of that, and what that means is, and this is a reversal in some senses in some people's minds, that mitigation actually is the best form of adaptation, because after a point of time you cannot adapt. And our teams have sort of done the assessment on that, and we know what it means in terms of of impact and potential loss of life, etc. So I think the beginning of that shift has started. So there are a whole range of other things, and something that that was the reason that I was there was to actually and Sridhar is here also. C40, UCLG, and ICLE came together. The major groups, and we sort of helped run that process there. The major urban groups. 2,000 cities have made a commitment to do deeper cuts than their own countries. So what we're saying is that some of these processes are leading from places which we didn't necessarily see them from happening. But the point is, we have very little time. Lima is around the corner, and we have to achieve a closure in Paris, because if we do not achieve a closure in Paris, then all of these processes, which include the financing of development and the SDGs, will cross each other in the night. And if that happens, I think we're in serious trouble. So it's a great opportunity, I think, for each of us as individuals who engage with this process, as professionals who work on the climate process, both on the adaptation and mitigation side, to really push for this to happen. Because we cannot afford to let what's happened from Rio till now, or from the Kyoto process from now to happen. It just will not work. I mean, we know that the evidence is out there, the impacts are out there, and I guess my colleagues will speak to that very quickly from the AR5 side. So, I just thought I'd lay that out there. It's a harsh story, but like some of us heard Gressa Maciel, who closed the session, this is a time not only of courage, but also of actually making that commitment. And that commitment affects all of us in our own personal lives, in the kind of world we like to live in, because there's no going back. I mean, this is worse than a thermonuclear engagement, because that's something that you can take away, you can decontaminate, you can fence off areas. But once the climate system has gone past the tipping point as far as this is concerned, there is no turning back. Or at least the turning back will happen over a much longer time scale than we'll be happy to think about. So with that, I'll hand over the mic to Dr. Ramesh, and we'd like to hear what you.
Thank you to the distinguished panel here and other distinguished colleagues in the room. I would like to take you through the kind of activities at Government of India level across the departments leading to the quantification of risks. As you know, if you have the best early warning systems, that is the good way of reducing the risks and building the resilience across the communities and across the people to deal with the weather extremes. Weather extremes is a reality projected by everybody, and at least we are seeing increase in the heavy rainfall events, etc. Let us see how the efforts in Government of India will take the things forward. So at the Ministry of Earth Sciences, we deal with different hazards, different institutions deal with different things, and we also work with other institutions like Central Water Commission and GSI for landslides and floods, etc. And you all know this is a standard diagram. These are the 10 indicators of the warming world. So except 3, everything is increasing: glaciers, snow cover, sea ice. And this is a standard figure. I don't want to spend more time on this. And these are the latest scenarios projected. And these are the lowest one, RCP 2.6 temperature projection, extreme one 8.5. Similarly, rainfall and 8.5 RCP 8.5 rainfall. So by and large, we are just seeing the projection of increased intensity of rainfall over monsoonal region, which is our prime area of concern here. And as you know, this is a very important thing. From the tornado scale to climate change variability and global impacts from El Nino and other activities, one has to deal comprehensively to understand the risks operating at different time scales and simultaneously happening across the world and different parts of the country. So here we have to work more on the preparedness component. I will be focusing more on this, where improving the forecasting systems, early warning systems, and assessing the risks and impacts will contribute to the building of resilience. That's where now we are also as a part of the preparedness of the risk management cycle. So it is identified, early warning has been identified as one of the important components of risk management globally. And risk identification is another area one has to look for. This will tell you the kind of risk you are living with and the kind of risk you have to deal with in future, so that you will have the level of capacity one has to build at physical side and social side and the economic side to manage the risks. Management of the risk is nothing but a parallel activity related to adaptation. That's what I feel. And this is a major shift in the thinking. So far earlier, this was the disaster risk paradigm. Now it has got enlarged because of the climate risk got added to the disaster risk profile. So both the climate risk and disaster risk are treated together because of the extremes that have been identified now, and they started impacting. So they are increasing our domain of exposure and the other socio-economic issues related to poverty, environmental degradation, and they add additional degree of vulnerability beyond the existing disaster risk, both at local level and national level. And this is when you mix both disaster risk and climate risk, this is the sort of just profile mapping across the world. Here, as far as the early warning is concerned, it deals with the observing systems. Once you have the modern observing systems, at least you can deal with the kind of intensity you have to deal with associated with the tropical cyclones and the zones of heavy precipitation and zones of strong winds where damage potential is high and where storm surge is high, etc. All those activities can be planned. Response actions, emergency response actions can be planned based on your observing systems and modeling systems. This will happen 24 hours before, and for that we are setting up good network of Doppler weather radars across the country, and to monitor the sea level in real time. This works for tsunami and as well as for the storm surge related monitoring. About 35 stations are there along our coastline, and you have another parameter measurement called the HF radar that generates the wind structure at the ocean level, current structure at the ocean level associated with the various coastal hazards that include tsunami, cyclone, storm surge, and other sea swells, etc. These are all multi-hazard observing systems. They can be used depending upon your ability to interpret, use that information for your application. Another important thing is the sea level rise that is happening across the globe. And earlier upper panel is up to 92 to 96, difference between 2011 and 2014. Here we didn't have much increase in the sea level till 2000. This is the 2014 figure, sorry. This is the one up to 2010. This is the updated figure up to 2014. From 2010 update to 2014, we have seen the pockets of increasing sea level, which was not the case earlier in 2010. So these are the satellite altimetry observations. Every month you can get the update of this, and this will help you to see globally vis-a-vis with other countries how our neighboring oceans are changing their landscape as far as the sea level rise is concerned. And another important area is storm surge, where inundation is computed based on the intensity and the landfall of the tropical cyclone. And once this information is available with you, you can plan for other actions. I will show some of those examples how we have built those capacities at the local level. So in a complete sense, in a comprehensive manner, pathway to climate risk management passes through disaster risk management. That is the kind of thinking that has been going on now, at least at the UNSCAP and several domains. And I think a lot of agreement is there in terms of this, particularly degree of vulnerability gets changed. So in the designed changed circumstances, what we have to have is we have to build local scale decision support systems for vulnerability. Vulnerability could be due to a extreme event, vulnerability due to the existing climate risk, vulnerability due to your multi-hazard impacts. Same area is vulnerable to earthquakes and floods. Same area is vulnerable to earthquakes, cyclones and floods as well. So every smallest administrative scale is differently vulnerable for different components of extremes. So we have to have a systems built for decision support systems of vulnerability that should be able to quantify the population to be affected, and it should have all components of to deal with individual disaster to the climate scale vulnerability assessment. It is possible with the JS and decision support systems and whatever local level data sets are available. So one has to start work with that. So I will show some of the examples where frameworks are developed and they can be updated to include the climate component as well into their assessments. Areas under threat, threat to crops, damage to structures, your lifeline networks like rail and road and communication networks, and what are your most hotspot vulnerable points where you have to deal with in terms of when extremes start happening in your area. Those vulnerable points got to be identified. Cyclone shelters are one of the examples where people can be safely relocated. So these are some of the attributes. You should be able to generate these things at the smallest possible scale. Perhaps that would help in managing the risks. This one particular thing, this we have developed for Government of Andhra Pradesh in 2005 under between 2001 and 2005. So this is one particular example I am just showing here. This is when you don't have data with your parametric model for wind damage. So to different wind associated with the cyclone at the time of landfall, this is a wind speed pattern that is generated associated with the landfall of cyclone. This is that Godavari river of the East Godavari and West Godavari districts, where when the cyclone is crossing this way, strongest winds are here, and how the wind distribution changes across the district along with associated with the landfall. When such a thing is there, and if you have details of tiled houses, for example, you can generate that particular map where maximum damage to different types of tiled roofs houses are there. They are the most vulnerable ones. So they can withstanding winds for those tiled roofs are known in terms of the structural details are available to different structures of different types of walls and houses. So putting that threshold, you can generate this kind of information. Once you have the distribution of storm surge associated with that, You can generate even detail, such a detail for paddy crop also. If paddy crop is there, how much percentage of damage can be there in that area when you don't have detailed data. So this is again on the damage to different crops. If you have the crop data where bananas are there, where paddy is there, where sugarcane is there, so you can generate within this region itself the degree of impact to different crops. So I'm just showing the example where the kind of details you generate and put it into your decision support systems, you can extract attribute specific damage potential from the same vulnerability frameworks. So if you see, when you have the data generated at that district level and sub-district level, you can get the details of damage to same paddy crop. So if you have the data, acreage details available, you can get this kind of information. These are some of the examples which I wanted to share. Decision support systems are available in this country. We have experience of building this kind of things. So we have to expand these systems to the total vulnerability component. And this again for the storm surge, another example. Once you compute the surge, when you have the sub-district boundaries, you can know how the different extent of inundation and duration of inundation, depth of inundation, all those details you can get. And these are some of the details identifying the population. Once you have the data of population, you can know how much, how many people are to be relocated during that associated with that event. And you can even have the details of cyclone shelters from the affected area, how much distance they are, what is the safe route to take the affected people to the cyclone shelter from their likely affected zones. So all sorts of information it is possible to build in. It goes to your own wisdom to design the kind of analysis you want to generate. These are some of the examples. This again, this one particular example, this is the future risk. You take a maximum cyclone that has affected this particular East Godavari district and you prescribe 20% stronger intensity to that in the same model. You can see how the vulnerability increases as the wind increases and the intensity of the cyclone increases. Like for example, this yellow color, when the global warming 10% increase, if you see, earlier, this green color was here and it has extended to more region. Once you put extreme increase in cyclone intensity of the cyclones to 20%, so almost whole of the district is becoming vulnerable for the future. So like this, some of these scenarios, more you can prescribe a scenario and generate its impact. So these are the examples and expertise we have in this country. And this is true for floods also. This is for one particular Pennar River in Nellore. Once the bank top overflowing takes place for a flood event, you can get the depth and duration and extent of inundation across the river channel at the smallest administrative scale. Once you get that, if you overlap at the district level also, you can know all this information. Like that, for floods, it is possible. Same scenarios using the same flood model can be generated for more intensity of floods happening in each of the river basin like this. So you can have vulnerability profile and vulnerability assessment and risk management options accordingly can be worked out. And the future which is there, I want to show this. We have built it for tsunami, and this can be used for any inundation in the coastal areas. It is a 3D GIS, it is called. Once you have the depth of inundation, storm surge inundation or tsunami inundation generated, so with these details, all local level attribute data can be generated. You can go to that detail and you can get mapping generated with the 3D GIS and get the street level details generated. And once you overlay your inundation layer on this, you can know at street level what could be the depth of inundation. So all these details are possible now. Technology is available. For Kadalur and Nagapattinam, this is done already. These are the examples from the Nagapattinam area. And for other coastal areas of the India, the work is going on now. At least in this plan, we should have at least coastal 2 kilometers to 3 kilometers. We should have 3D GIS available. So this will give more details on, instead of relocating whole districts in the coastal, we can decide only the most affected areas and take the emergency response actions accordingly. Another important area one we have to work with is the coastal zone management. So we are already having new coastal zone management notification. So that will identify, demarcate 4 different zones in the coastal areas. and that will decide where exactly we have to allow development, where exactly we cannot allow development at all, and all these options are being worked out. For this, government is drawing a vulnerability line at 1:4,000 scale along the coastal areas. So that vulnerability line will decide where the development should be allowed, and wherever already development has taken place, infrastructure is placed, how to build the hazard resistant measures. Like morning you were telling Vijayawada, they will go for dikes and other things. So this is the sort of thing when the setback line is decided, so you can work with all those technology options where your resilience and safety for your infrastructure can be planned. So this is one of the area where agriculture is likely to be affected because of our own agriculture agroclimatic zones in the country. So this Director Krida will be talking more on this. And Indian economy, we have problems associated with droughts and floods, cyclonic storms, inundation, which I touched about it, 10 to 20% increase. Impacts of that, how we can deal in decision support systems, I have already mentioned. What we have to concentrate now is on the biodiversity loss and impacts of sea level rise on the coastal areas. That's the area where we have not worked so far. I think focus has to happen at least from now. And then, we have to work out within our own systems, ecological zones, capacity to increase carbon sinks. Perhaps those options also we have to work on. Apart from working on renewables, nuclear energy, and all those mitigating priorities, perhaps natural carbon sinks, that potential also we should perhaps target as a scientific priority. And agriculture is one sector. Major focus is already there in the Government of India, and several groups are working on. And more outreach related activity for education, training, and rural extension services to build adaptation efforts on which you are all working, different groups are working here. That is the theme on which we are discussing here. So we are basically focusing on improving our capacity for extreme forecasting and extreme quantification of impacts in this country. And adaptation versus mitigation is the issue which already Ravi talked about, and where I want to suggest that oceans are the area which we have to focus. And this is the main philosophy with which several institutions at the S&T level are working. We have a knowledge system at S&T at global level and the national level, and that science and technology driven knowledge has to drive the clean development options to the country, where appropriately adaptation policies, mitigation strategies need to be worked out. And then national level climate change programs and international negotiations, they have to get feed in based on those assessments we have. And to deal with this the system effectively, we have launched under National Action Plan on Climate Change about 8 missions. The 9th mission is there on energy and additional mission on energy. And here these are all the major missions which Government of India launched, which has got both mitigation and adaptation components built into that. Most of the programs are grounded, means several activities are going on, and we are joint very closely working in the strategic knowledge mission of the climate change. So S&T capacity on climate change, we have a lot of resource potential in this country, but all those efforts are fragmented research efforts. We have to link them and make them integrated to address the global challenges and our national challenges. And there's a link between science and policy got to be strengthened, and the linkage to the society has to be increased from the outcomes of science, and partnership with the private sector. That awareness has come with corporate social responsibility, since they are also likely to be affected. At least ASSOCHAM and FICCI and all those are talking about climate change, how to use that knowledge in the private sector economic activities. And at least good thinking started in this country after AR5. And strategic knowledge system is it should be driven by the latest climate science. Particularly our climate science is the monsoon science. Our monsoon impacts of present impacts and the future impacts will tell us how we have to deal with our own food security and other livelihood related options. Monsoon drives every other activity in this country, as you all know. So our climate change focus is the monsoon variability of the future. And on the technology side, we have to have assessment of technology scenarios and what we will have, seeing all those international IPR and all those issues. UNFCCC is addressing this particular issue where we can have access to the new technologies which are proven for adaptation and mitigation, and filling the knowledge gaps of the future and present is another thing. And these are major deliverables identified under the strategic knowledge mission on climate change. Here again, different networks are set up for different components. Different groups at national level will be working on to generate state-of-the-art thematic papers and update them from time to time. And these are the activities are lined up. Decision support systems play a clear mention here. That's why I have just demonstrated where our capacity exists, and we have to scale up that activity at the local scale. And the strategic knowledge mission essentially serves all of the missions of Government of India in terms of generating mission-specific strategic knowledge. So this is the new area. We are also learning how to generate this information, how to link the strategic knowledge generated for different missions and linked it for the mission implementation targets and modifying those targets in the longer time scales to come. And this is knowledge is dynamic. As and when the new models come, new science come, new AR5, AR6 comes, so these update will be happening. We should have a system of updating all this knowledge from time to time. And this is another area where a lot of effort is going on to build global technology watch groups in this country. And it is a new area. We have started consultations how to build this global technology watch group. And role of technology in climate change mitigation is the prime component of global technology watch group. There are other, apart from these options, there are several other options emerging from now onwards. So we should be current with all those options available and where to adopt those things and which are the things which are really relevant to us and useful to us. That work has to happen from the global technology watch groups. And we have to looking on these technological changes also from time to time based on the innovation and other global developments happening. And Indian technology agenda we have to come with as far as the climate change and energy issues are concerned in this country. And there are different targets of different missions which I don't want to go much in detail. And it is a multilateral process where research, development, present development options and future appropriate options, safe development options, minimum risk options have to be worked out, and those have to be provided to the country. I'm closing. And I'm just end with my information here to show the recent success stories. This is a World Bank report thing. As far as the technology, climate smart development pathways are concerned, this is available on web. I'm just focusing here on industry sector. We have achieved a great deal of improvement in India compared to other developing countries and US and EU as well. So this shows that though the same options are used, the kind energy saved is more in China, but whereas life saved for the same effort is more in India. So I just want to show this kind of diversity of impacts, even if you use the known solutions which have proven to be successful elsewhere outside. And another example, we have the transport sector, that BRT sector, and that will follow this particular thing. And for 2030, this is the projection given for different countries. Here, you can clearly see India is gaining by the similar prescription of actions. We are destined to gain more on health sector as compared to agriculture and energy sectors. with the same kind of analysis done across the countries. So outcomes are varying nature. And these are the differences and similarities across the same action, similar actions taken across the continents, how they will yield for us. So over. One more I want to show. Enough of this, I think we can have later. Thank you.
I'm sure he had another 50 more slides, but you got a tour de force of, the adaptation, mitigation, the entire spread of where we're actually working on. So if I can ask Professor Ravindranath, who is...
Actually, I'm hungry, so I'll finish early. So, well, when I was asked by Aroma to come and make a brief presentation, I was not sure what I must speak about. Then I decided that I heard something about Korea start C, collaboration. So I thought we should really, I should make a brief presentation about what's happening in India so that there could be, this one. Okay. This one, yeah. Well, I thought let me give a brief about what India is trying to do under the National Communications Project. As you all know, almost all the countries, whether South Africa, Sudan, all the countries are expected to submit periodically what's called the National Communications Report to the UNFCCC, which includes everything that the country is trying to do or understand about climate change. I thought since Korea is about collaboration, then I thought that this project should really benefit and also provide inputs to other national efforts. So that's the reason I thought I will briefly talk about the national communications. India, for example, I will focus on India. India's submitted the second national communication in 2004. Now we are about to initiate the national communications for the third communication. Well, what does national communications report includes for those who are not familiar? Actually, it covers all aspects. It talks about greenhouse gas emissions from the country, from all the sectors. For the last 10 years, now we have to submit. And again, now it also talks about mitigation opportunities in energy, transport, forest, agriculture, and so on. And it talks about climate change projections for the country at various scales. And most importantly, it also talks about the impact of climate change in all sectors, forests, water, agriculture, and so on, fisheries, and so on. And then it also talks about, we should really talk about the vulnerability of different sectors, different communities, different regions to different climate scenarios. And then, of course, developing adaptation strategy and framework and how to mainstream adaptation in developmental programs. And it also talks about the research status in the country, what are the national efforts made, what are the knowledge gaps, constraints in research, understanding, and so on, and what are the strategies to really overcome these limitations. Of course, one of the reasons why you should really look at NatCom, at least in India, and I'm sure in other countries as well, it brings in the best possible scientific methods, models, and frameworks are employed by all the groups. And it involves potentially the largest network of institutions and experts, and a lot of the experts and institutions involved in the Indian National Communications Project are all here in different rows of this room. And I'm happy that Aroma has brought them here so that there could be some collaboration interaction between the scientists and institutions and this career. One thing you should know in climate change, you should know all the acronyms. This is ASAR, and there is Korea. There is so many things. Murali, what is this? Just hold it. So ASAR should collaborate with NatCom. So there are large. It's a large network, I think, of scientists and institutions, and we should benefit from one another. And of course, the other issue is the findings of the National Communications Project go through the governmental process, which is very important. It goes through all the departments in the government of India. It even goes to the cabinet. I don't know why it goes to the cabinet, but it goes to the cabinet. And of course, it's also published. For example, we brought out 2 special issues of Current Science on the National Communications Project findings. And of course, it goes through a large dissemination. So I thought people who are not familiar should know a little bit about National Communications Project and benefit from that. And I'll focus, since Purnamita is going to focus on the mitigation, emissions, and so on, I'll focus on climate projections, impacts, adaptation, vulnerability, and adaptation. We call IVA framework, impact, vulnerability, adaptation. And I'll just give a brief about what we did. In fact, this is a presentation I made just a few weeks ago in Delhi. We had a meeting of all the scientists and experts, not just scientists, all the experts and institutions on preparing a strategy for third national communications. I gave one of the keynote speeches. These are some of the slides I used from the talk. And I'll just say on the climate projections for the second national communications project, I'll just first briefly tell you 2-3 slides about what we did in the second national communications, and another 2-3 slides on what we are trying to do for the third national communications in the next 4 to 5 years. Well, one of the big challenges really climate projections during the national communications too. We used precise model, and of course using the British Hadley Center model RM3, and we had projections for different periods. Well, one thing about ASAR I learned is that it's about long-term climate change, projections, impacts, vulnerability. So obviously it's all about modeling. If you're talking about long terms, there's no escape from modeling, whether it's climate projections or impacts or vulnerability assessments. So then, of course, we looked at impacts on different sectors: water, forests, agriculture, livestock, fisheries, human health, coastal zones, and even integrated assessment model. We used several models. I will not go into those details, and I will skip some of them. In fact, we try to look at as many sectors as possible, and in the third national communications, we try to cover all the sectors which we left out in the second. Some of the major questions we are addressing are which are system models, outputs from CIMIP 5 we have to use, what Codex model outputs we should use, what are available, what will become available for the different regions. Even for Africa, there is a Codex for Africa, there is a Codex for East Asia and South Asia and so on. That's one of the best source of downscaled, dynamically downscaled climate outputs. Dr. Krishnan is here, probably he will talk about that. And should we use a common set of models for agriculture, forest, water, fisheries, and so on and so forth? And what representative concentration pathway scenarios? You all know there are 4 scenarios. And CIMIP 5 model outputs are available for all the 4, whereas Codex for different regions are available only for some of the RCPs. And what sectors to be assessed for impact of climate change, coastal zones, fisheries, energy, infrastructure, apart from agriculture, forest, water, and so on. And should we attempt apart from sectoral, multi-sectoral, if you take Western Ghats or Himalayas, forests, agriculture, water, they're all linked. Is it possible to look at that? In fact, there are attempts to look at that at the global scale. So we thought we should really look at Western Ghats, Himalayas, arid Rajasthan, try to look at multi-sectoral, take a landscape which includes forests, agriculture, water resources, and so on, and see the interlinkages. If climate change impacts water resources, it will impact agriculture, and so on and so forth. And again, the next question is, should we assess and report impacts at what level? At national level, at state level, at watershed level, at river basin, at forest type, cropping systems? It varies from sector to sector. And again, should we aim at multiple impact models in the national communications? First and second, we used only one impact model for water resource, one impact model for forest, couple of them for agriculture, and so on. But we all know, for example, we have been running models on forests. If I use 2 models, we get 2 different outputs. So obviously, you can't rely on one model. So we thought we should explore multiple impact models for, say, water, forest, agriculture, and so on. And then, should all sectors assess vulnerability profiles, and what kind of vulnerability profiles? Are we talking about biophysical vulnerability profiles, or socioeconomic profiles? Should you do it at district level, or ecosystem level, or a forest type level? And again, vulnerability assessment is largely restricted to current climate variability, which is very important for current planning and adaptation and so on. So we thought we should look at both the vulnerability for current climate as well as vulnerability for long-term climate or future climate. And of course, what about adaptation framework at the national level? Should we have a common adaptation framework? Should we look at current climate risks and adaptation to that? And also look at adaptation for the future climate. So there are a whole range of issues, not that we have answers for all, but we hope to find soon. And I'll skip this for want of time. I'm sure all of you have seen how important climate change is all about managing risk, according to Chris Field, who's one of the co-chairs of this, and I'll skip this. And about climate change projections, of course, we have a number of options available. Dr. Krishnan is here. Dr. Ramesh, they're involved in all this. And of course, as a user, I'm an impact modeler. So what are the options for me? I'm sure the same, many people in this room. So you have a Cortex for Africa. I think there are more than one Cortex for Africa. Models available. Is it possible to have an ensemble of multiple Earth system model Cortex outputs? And the problem is all Earth system models do not provide all the climatology parameters required for impact assessment in agriculture or forest or water resources. So obviously, if you want to just talk about temperature rainfall, yes, you can use all the 50 or 60 models, and GCM grid scale is good enough. But if you want to really look at impacts on cropping system, river basins, forest types, you need a whole range of 15, 20 climatology parameters, which are available only for a few Earth system models. So again, one option is whether to use individual Cortex model outputs, you will hear more about them, or whether you should use an ensemble of 30 or 40 or 50 as system models. And again, what scenarios to use, what time period, what baseline. There are a whole range of issues available. And again, impact models, how to really assess the vulnerability. That means you need to really first assess vulnerability to current climate risks and make climate projections, and then assess the impact of climate change on different sectors, and then develop vulnerability profiles for current climate as well as the future climate, and then assess the current coping strategies, how adequate or inadequate they are, and then come up with other adaptation strategies, and then of course developing programs and policies on how to mainstream adaptation. And adaptation framework, I'm sure there are very good experts in this room. I will skip this also. Just to conclude, this is my last slide. Just to conclude, in the National Communications Project, I'm sure in this ASAR project also we'll have a similar scheme. We need to make climate projections, because ASAR also talks about long-term climate change, long-term adaptation strategies, in addition to current climate variability. I would say both are important, current climate variability as well as the long-term climate change. So climate projections, we really have to decide on what Earth system models, what kind of Cortex outputs are available for your region, whether it's Sub-Saharan Africa, East Africa, North Africa, and Asia as well, South Asia as well. So what kind of, maybe sometimes good, a combination of a good ensemble of Earth system models at a GCM scale may be good enough for many impact assessments. And again, coming to climate impacts, which sectors you want to assess. I'm sure in in the semi-arid region, you can't just look at agriculture. You have to look at water, you have to look at forests and grasslands and so on. So what sectors you want to look at, and what approach will you look at just only semi-arid crops, or you will look at the watersheds, or you want to look at river basins. So there are a whole range of issues available here on which sectors, which scale, for which period, and what ecosystem scale and so on. And then of course you really have to develop climate change impact is one thing, but there are other factors which increase or reduce the vulnerability of a community for a given climate change. The climate change even for a given level of warming or changes, in rainfall pattern, the impact will be different for different communities and different set of people, different regions. And then of course adaptation framework. So I will stop here by saying that this Karya and ASAMAP should really benefit from the whole range of existing work going on and in many countries. And National Communications Project, one of the largest program happening, whether it's South Africa or India, Brazil. I'm involved, I was involved at some stage in evaluating all these projects for many countries. Massive $10 million, $50 million funds are given by Global Environment Facility. And I think we should really benefit from this network. The already large network exists. Now we are creating another network, which is the international network. I think the national international network should work together and benefit, because not one institution or one country can have all the knowledge required. And ASAR is all about modeling, because you're talking about long-term climate change. So there's no escape from modeling, and modeling is one of the biggest challenges. As I'm sure Dr. Ramesh would agree with me, that's one of the major constraints or limitations in this country and in most developing countries. Thank you.
Thanks, Ravi. That was quick. Actually, the interesting thing that's emerging here is this common theme of risk. And India's, this is part of the, I guess, what we try to communicate to decision makers here, and that is apart from sea level rise and glacial melt, we've had 2,000 years of dealing with risk in this country. We have institutionalized mechanisms at the local level, whether it's farmers who know how to adapt to this process, or the first manuals on drought and famine were written in this country 150 years ago. So they're institutionalized. The question is, how do you bring that into current variability and future climates? And that's why the quality of the models become very, very critical, and the intercommunication between what those models do and what we know how to do on the ground. So there's spontaneous adaptation that's happening across the country in many places. We have remarkable experiences of that. This group actually went out and spent some time in Maharashtra looking at a wonderful piece of work that's been going on for 25 years there on sort of watershed work, which is now moving into adaptation. So those responses exist. The question is, how do you scale them, and what do you scale them to in terms of the risk framing? So one of the sort of the reframing that's happening within this room, we had the Global System Risk meeting here about 3 or 4 months back, is the transition from poverty, like I said, to everyday risk, which is the most significant challenge that poor people and vulnerable people deal with, to extensive risk. And drought is one classic example of an extensive risk that takes place at a very, very slow onset, but could have dramatic impacts, to what Dr. Ramesh showed us in terms of extreme events, whether it's super cyclones or otherwise. Paramita, you're good? Yeah. Okay, great, good. I was just filibustering for you. So you have here now the you have the CLA for the AR5 on rural areas. So in a sense, I think this group has been waiting really to hear what she has to say, because the whole question of how rural adaptation has happened globally over the last 5 years was assessed by her and by other colleagues for the IPCC, and she's one of India's leading economists who works on this question. So I think we'll get a lot of interesting insights, especially on vulnerability and impact. Sorry. No.
Thank you, Arumar, for inviting me here. It's a privilege to address so many experts. Actually, I'm going to take advantage of being the last speaker to just pick and choose and share some thoughts with you, because so much has already been said. So actually, that's the reason I had to excuse myself, because I obviously had to doctor all the slides that I had prepared and brought. So one of the first things I decided was actually that I won't speak on agriculture, because when I heard you introducing yourself, I realized that this group here probably knows much more about agriculture and agricultural adaptation than I do. So I won't talk about that, but just a few general things. Firstly, I was also under the impression that maybe I should talk a little bit about, contextualize issues for India. What struck me while doing the IPCC assessment for the rural areas was that there were commonalities in the stories that emerged across Africa and Asia. And these commonalities really lay in the fact that climate change was a threat multiplier, which was now kind of questioning, forcing the all of us to question how we prioritize, how we allocate resources, how we fund resources, in treating this as this threat multiplier that has come on top of all the threats that we already have in these continents. And that is where the risk framework really becomes very, very useful, particularly for adaptation analysis, because we start mainstreaming the climate risk as part of the other risks, kind of overlaying what we already have. So, for instance, in India, we have all our issues. We have done well recently in terms of many of our macroeconomic indicators, in terms of gains in GDP, per capita income. some amount of poverty alleviation and so on. But this growth story has been a really energy intensive industry, not industry, it was a services GDP as far as GDP is concerned, but it's also parallelly an extremely energy intensive growth story. And it's paradoxical that we have energy poverty in large parts of the country in parallel with an overall energy intensive growth story at the macro level. And so we have increasingly, we have to face issues, questions of long-term sustainability, not just in terms of mitigation, but this is where the adaptation story also comes in, because long-term sustainability, therefore, the concept of sustainability to me integrates adaptation and mitigation. That is the concept that actually can sort of link these two. Now, and we know that globally, the mitigation story has sort of drawn a lot of focus, but increasingly adaptation is also coming into focus, although there are huge adaptation funding deficits and so on. But without getting into that, now when we try to look at it, we know that the IPCC risk assessment framework tells us that there are many, many kinds of risks that will occur at varying levels. All these risks are at varying levels of certainty. They occur at different degrees of temperature. They don't all occur across the board. But they are cause for concern, particularly since for the first time in the IPCC assessment, they're telling us there are observed impacts that they are able to attribute to climate change. So which actually is some kind of consensus that science is telling us, although we are still not sure of attributing everything that's happening to climate change, or I would not everything, I would say we are not 100% sure of our attributions, but for most of the scientific world, from drawing from across disciplines, is coming to consensus that there's enough observed impacts to become really, really concerned about this issue now. So you can see that there are very many impacts, for example, in, oops, I'm so sorry. I think I went off somewhere else. Okay. In Africa, Asia, all over the world. And of course, the reasons for concern are that we have very many underlying pre-existing threats in these parts of the world, which makes us particularly susceptible to climate impacts. Now, I don't know what I'm doing, it's vanishing. Oops. Well, we'll skip it since it's vanishing. It's not meant to be seen. Now, what also comes up when we look at this kind of a risk framework is that we have to constantly we are driven by this multiple objectives story where we are hunting for low regrets, no regrets strategies on the mitigation side primarily. But what I want to say is that one framework here is that you also are hunting for low regrets, no regrets strategies on the adaptation front. And in fact, in doing the assessment of the available adaptation literature, this was one of the gaps, which I think more adaptation work can really try and fill this gap. It was a challenge. Two fronts. One is very little of adaptation assessment, actually. So are there ways in which we can actually try and evolve frameworks where we assess the adaptation, what we claim as adaptation? How do we assess it? Can we assess it? Can we give inputs on that? Because that would then make a much more convincing story about policy inputs as well, right? The other thing was in adaptation, of course, was this story of techniques for adaptation. Here too, it was felt that I felt that, there is an imbalance between quantitative and qualitative, use of quantitative and qualitative techniques for adaptation. Somehow, most of the literature seems to currently say mitigation is the domain of quantitative, adaptation is the domain of qualitative. Why? At which stage? When it comes to policy. As long as it comes to something which is very technocratic, you're happy with the quantitative. But somehow, when it comes to adaptation, things start getting blurred. It starts looking like there is more uncertainty, more difficult to put a concrete proposal on the board with regard to adaptation. The question that keeps coming to mind is, why is it so when we think that the attribution of a risk or the attribution of something happening is not something which is limited to adaptation? It's as risky for mitigation as for adaptation. So my argument would be that we shouldn't get bogged down with this detection and attribution thing, which unfortunately throws half the adaptation work out of the window. Half of the adaptation work that goes on in the world goes out of the window because it stalls when you start talking about detection and attribution. And this is where I want to highlight something that if you read the IPCC AR5 report, on some of the chapters, the human settlements chapter, the health chapter, you will find that increasingly the literature has started focusing on the importance of addressing current risks. And it clearly states in several cases with evidence that a large part of the story of tackling climate change in the developing and least developed world is about addressing current risks. And this is where the adaptation, I think, one very useful framework for adaptation analysis can actually come up. Just to give a small example, some examples for what I mean when I say this. I'll give you a set of examples. I don't know how much detection and attribution for climate change. We have friends from the UK here, actually went into determining, went into the decision to when they gave there was an order that all public utilities have to compulsorily submit their adaptation plans against flooding and so on, existing public utilities, along with their regular paperwork annually on taxation to the government of the UK. I'm sure they didn't worry too much about how much, whether it was 10%, whether it was 29% or 31% or 50%. If it's a threat that you perceive as important, and if you can convincingly build the argument, your work is half done. Another example, for instance, recently in fact, it was an IDRC-sponsored work that I did on climate change and health. Some districts in India, adaptation in the health sector. And it's very interesting that, I found, I'll show you some pictures of what I found. No, I want to show this later. So this is in the Sundarbans, which faced a very heavy cyclone Isla, in 2009. So I went around asking this question, what would be different? And there's been a lot of funding, a lot of focus on the Sundarbans. So I asked officials, I asked communities, what would be different if Isla hit you again? Or if the intensity of Isla went up? Or if the frequency of Isla went up? Because this is one very sensitive zone for climate change-related extreme events. And across the board, the only convincing answer was, we think mortality might be lower because we have more cyclone shelters. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is whether this is sufficient for us as adaptation to have just a few lower risk of mortality. Is that sufficient for us? Or do we want more? Do we expect more out of all the funding and the adaptation work that has gone in? And this is where I think interdisciplinarity is also very important. If you see, for example, this is innovation. This is a hand pump over there. They've built cyclone shelter. So where the hand pump is built on the first floor. Very nice. Now let me show you the access route to the cyclone shelter. Right? Fantastic. A cyclone shelter is located just next to the primary health center. That is why I've written the Radhanagar Primary Health Center. So this is a mud embankment road on which the two of us, that's me and my colleague, couldn't stand next to each other, right? laterally. We had to stand, side by side. So what's going to happen when there's a cyclone? Even if you've built a fantastic cyclone shelter, which is 2 miles inside from this point, and is this the way you're going to get there? But the story about adaptation is, it's not to point out the flaw in this. The idea is, the story about adaptation is, so when I do my GIS mapping of flood-prone areas, let us also collect data and do the GIS mapping for access routes to facilities. So there's always things that can be done, which are stories which only, as you were saying in the morning, ground level, field work, adaptation, about lessons, good learning practices can give us. And therefore, the adaptation work is very important. Can I take 1 more minute? Okay. Sorry. Oh, 1 more minute, promise. Finally, one other thing I wanted to share with you that we came up. Within adaptation work, within adaptation, now this is where I'm wearing my economist's hat. We realize there's a lack, as I said earlier, of quantitative methodologies being applied to adaptation. Very little assessments of valuation, of losses, damages. We now have, even on the international scene, all this damage and loss. Where's our data on damage and loss? What is the data that can emanate from the adaptation sector, which can feed into damage and loss? And here we found a few limited studies, which of course do, economic valuation using very conventional, traditional techniques. So I would really ask that we go in for innovative valuation. And there is a lot which is theoretically now possible, but which has not been applied in developing country context. So it would be a good way, one area if there is any interest to proceed in. So typically, these are just some examples. They're from real life, self-consumption or collection of NTFPs. What's the value if you lose this livelihood? There's this, the picture on the right is of this, it's by a well-known painter. It's about this Ethiopian farmer who's trying to bargain for a loan for his livestock, which he wants to get insured. Because we hear a lot, it's a spoof, because we hear a lot about weather-based insurance. But he's got stuck because he doesn't know what value what is the number he should put on his livestock. But he knows he may lose it, and he would love to have the insurance. And of course, where there is uncertainty about ecosystem services, something that we are still not able to address through our known valuation techniques. This is an area where methodology has to evolve. So maybe when we do our adaptation work, we also keep in mind how we feed into existing methodologies and take the story forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're meant to be into lunches now, but I just thought if we can have just 3 or 4 quick questions and people can the panel can respond, that'll be really nice. So, any questions? Especially from colleagues who come from other parts of the world. I mean, Africa has first place here. Sridhar. To any of the panelists. You seem to be very, very hungry here.
So something that we've been grappling with in Southern Africa is the plethora of vulnerability assessments that are out there, the plethora of impacts assessments, and often then there's a methodological or an institutional gap to adaptation, and translating all of that fine work in understanding risk into actual action in terms of either policy strategies, which sometimes happens, but even further down the line, actual action on the ground in terms of adaptation. So I was wondering if the panelists could comment on whether there are any lessons that we could learn from India, or if they're actually facing the same challenges here.
Is there any other questions, or we can just go with this one? Yeah? Fine. Let's go.
Well, Mark is your name? Okay, Mark. I don't think we reach a stage where we have the luxury of good science that's available in front of us, whether to assess the impacts or vulnerability. I would say vulnerability assessment is still an art. The way I would assess vulnerability is different from the way you would do it, she would do it, you would do it. So I think there's still a lot of learning that has to happen. A lot of science has to really evolve before, unlike in the other fields, where we can, the diagnosis, you have a recommendation. But here, if you want to really look at the impact of climate change, for example, I'm very familiar with forests, my students, my research team, it's so difficult to understand or make a projection in 30 years, in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, what will happen to the forests and biodiversity in the Western Ghats. We are not there. Our models are not good enough. Same with water resources. Models are not good enough to make a reliable projection, and we don't even know which climate scenario to adopt, which climate earth system model to use. Each ESM produces different rainfall patterns. So I don't think we are there where we can really, based on the best science, we can make recommendations. So I think it's a challenge. No one has an answer. The science is still evolving. Climate projections, modeling is okay, but impact modeling is still in its infancy. We still do not have good vegetation models to assess how climate change will impact grasslands or forests. It's biodiversity, it's net primary productivity, how it impacts pests, fire, we don't know at all. And vulnerability is still even more bigger challenge. It's still an art. So given that, I think we're not reached a stage, but at the same time, we can't wait till the perfect knowledge. It will be too late, So we really it's a big struggle, how best we can use, based on the current limited knowledge, limitations of models, how best we can take decisions in managing resources or managing risk. It's a still challenge, but as I said, we cannot wait for the best science, best models. We have to make progress. It's a trial and learn. But we know, especially when it comes to adaptation, there are a lot of adaptation that has happened in the past by the farmers, by the fishermen, by the forest dwellers to historical changes. But under climate change, we say in the next 20, 30 years, they'll experience something which they're not experienced in the past. So the traditional knowledge is not adequate. So you need something more than, you need traditional knowledge plus. So I think we are all in the same process of learning and facing the big challenges. There are many uncertainties with models and projections, especially in this ASAR, ISAR, whatever. You're talking about long-term climate change, it's even bigger challenge. Current climate vulnerability, current climate risk, current coping strategies, we are reasonably okay because of vast experience in agriculture science as well as traditional knowledge.
Well, it's a challenge, of course, and we also have lots of these vulnerability assessments. I think maybe moving away from trying to generalize or trying to fit them into one framework towards trying to make it as decentralized, as local as possible. Although ultimately at a policy level, we want to be able to draw some stories we can come up. But at a practical level, if you're thinking at the implementational scale, so I think that would become easier to handle. For example, even at the institutional scale. So for instance, in my field work at times, I have found that there are places, states within India where there is high, there's been a lot of training, a lot of awareness of the climatic events, but there is no awareness about response, right? So over there, if I have assessments, vulnerability assessments, they feed into designing my training of response, creating awareness like that. So I think if I look at trying to put vulnerability assessments into one framework, it's more difficult. But if I'm trying to draw a lesson out of it to feed into a particular institutional context, that is easier. And I think we have some evidence from India that we are actually doing things, some places at least. Some new infrastructure planning, for instance, is taking it on board, but there has been past vulnerability assessment which has fed into taking a current decision.
I just want to add here, we have to build systems on the existing risk management first. Decision support tools for climate smart developmental options can be worked out based on the existing risk assessment. As and when the less certain signs emerges, these tools can be augmented, updated for future developmental options, make it more multi-hazard risk and climate smart development. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to say thank you very much for the presentations because I think they were really interesting. But that's also a way to say I might ask a question which is unfair, so don't come back at me with too much vengeance. But what I observed, and I think this impression might be shared by a few people here, is there seems to be sort of two narratives in the presentations we saw. One was around climate modeling and the need for climate modeling, and I really like the phrase, there's no escape from modeling. It sounds like a... But I'm now been wondering, because as you said, a large part of addressing climate change is about addressing current risks. So there's clearly a need to understand the science and the impacts, but is there a real need for climate model projections for a lot of the adaptation that we're thinking about, and especially in the AZAR project, where climate science is perhaps it is one of the key ingredients, but it might not be. It's maybe it's not painted in the same way that it's been painted here. So I was just wondering if any of you have any comments to that. I'm saying that as a climate scientist.
Thank you again. One of the things that I'm beginning to sense is, again, as per the previous question, there was extensive information put out on the modeling. The second one on communicating the data that's been put together across sectors, and then third one is understanding the impact both from an economic sense and socioeconomics. And but what I'm beginning to see is, and as from a C40's perspective, how is that all of this information and the knowledge coming down to the level of the district administration? Because that's where and your photograph spoke 1,000 words. You know, you build the shelter, but you can't get to the shelter. I mean, how is the decisions that are made at the local level, how are they being influenced? Is there a strategy from the Ministry of Earth Sciences as well as so there is a fundamental disconnect at that level, because, and I think the more I'm beginning to see is cities and states need to frame their guidelines, or their they need to get their act together in at that level, because that's where the real challenge is. I mean, there's enough knowledge, there's enough material for those decisions to be made, but if those decisions are not translated to the level of what's happening on the ground, we will face a problem in the next, I would say in the next 3 to 5 years, because these climatic occurrences are going to get more severe and more frequent. So I'm just curious to know, are there any lessons from the panelists, or also from my friends from Africa? Do you face the same challenges there?
Yeah, thanks for the question. As far as the all-weather approach roads for cyclone shelters or other lifeline infrastructure, we call it, that is already taken up under the National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project, and at least for the states of Orissa, Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh. So that is fully addressed, that issue now. So that has to happen across the islands and other parts of the state. And as far as the emergency response systems are concerned, there is a fully integrated standard operation procedure, right from central government to state government and then to the district authorities, as far as cyclone, earthquake, tsunamis are concerned. But now we are developing standard operation procedures for urban floods. So the frequency of urban floods have increased, and with the network of Doppler weather radars and other automatic weather stations, satellite data coming in simultaneously from different sets of observing systems, we are learning to generate the local scale information, how the urban level responses got to be. For a certain segment of the urban sector only gets affected, not the whole of the city is getting affected also by the same rain event. So response has got to be a distributed response, and Bombay has been the good case study for us, and several lesson learnings are there as far as the urban flooding management is concerned. Thank you.
This is always a big challenge, what you said, whether we should really worry about long-term climate change. We had a minister with the same name as Dr. Ramesh. He used to ask, don't tell me about 2100, 2200, because none of us will be around. We can say anything and get away. But tell me what's going to happen in 2020, 2030, so that I can, when I see you left after 20 years, I can hang you. So the minister, the big challenge, I agree for, let us say, if I'm designing a watershed project, or an afforestation project, or water conservation project, obviously current climate variability is all that's important. But same time, we know there's new evidence it's available. Many of the extreme events that are happening around the world are simply beyond the normal climate variability. So I think that means soon, maybe in the next 5 years, 10 years, there could be we may expose to severe extreme events in different parts of the world, different extreme events. So we really have to really prepare for that. So I think you need whatever limited, despite all the uncertainties from climate models or impact models, we still need the outputs from them and build them into even our short-term planning. Next 5. I agree. If you're planning for next year, forget about climate change. If you're planning for 5 years, or if you're planning a forestry project, if you're planning a road project, railway project, any other project, you can't escape climate model outputs today. If you're planning for cropping season next year, agree, you don't need to worry about climate models. But if you're doing anything which has an implication of 5 years, or 10 years, or 20 years, I feel we should not ignore climate projections, no matter what uncertainties are involved in that.
Okay, I think I'll just quickly, a few quick sort of comments on this. The one thing is, given a country of the scale of India, we now have the ability to make the linkage between local level action and aggregate it all the way up. We didn't have that. And I think, communication technology has enabled that. The fact that we have cell phones everywhere in many places has made the fundamental difference, because you do have to, just like Purnima said, you do have to act locally. It just cannot work without that. And the classic examples, of course, are not from the drought and agricultural area, but when some of us, and Kamal is sitting in the back, he's from BCPR in New York, when some of us went in and did the assessment of the 99 super cyclone in Orissa, I led that assessment for the government of India, where maybe 10,000 people died. We actually don't know how many people died. The responses that have been built up since then, and the shock that I personally had there was when we went into Jagatsinghpur, on the afternoon that we landed there, in spite of the fact the central team had come in, the collector was asleep in the afternoon. And we've never seen that in practice. The collector was asleep. The entire district administration has sort of frozen completely. So from that situation to what we've seen now is a huge change. And why has that happened? That's happened because of a mixture of really high quality science and technology, because the warnings were in place, the models were in place, plus, and again, some of us in the room have been sort of instrumental in actually building and constructing that network of cyclone shelters across the state of Orissa, using community-based processes. That was an interesting thing that happened. When we used schools to do that, there were 1,200 schools that were built across that through village education councils who actually managed the design and choice of materials and processes in the school, including the large cyclone shelters. You actually build the capacity locally to make that happen. So I think the significant shift that we've seen is government sort of moving forward. And of course, Bangladesh is a classic example as far as this is concerned, but the government moving forward at one end, the early warning systems coming into place, people realizing that it's actually important for that to happen, and the chain of communication working. Plus, in this particular case, I think the important thing was the Chief Minister recalled every single MLA and all the political leaders to come into their districts and manage the process themselves. So it's, there are a whole range of multiple processes that are required to deal with the extreme event. But there are two other challenges which are much more complex. One is, of course, especially in complex systems like agricultural systems, you're impacted by a whole range of other factors that are in place. You don't necessarily understand the impact of a WTO induced price change in a particular place and how that will change what your seed patterns will be working. You don't understand how the implication of a change in, let's say, subsidy policy as far as groundwater is concerned will change your cropping pattern. that is much more difficult to understand. So one of the things that we are challenged with here is looking at the multi-sectoral impacts on something that is moderately easy to model. So you know from the agronomy side what will happen to a particular cultivar in a location. But the choice of that cultivar, whether a whole set of people will change the cropping pattern from one year to the other year, and how that will operate is something that's not very well understood. And you need to have very good feedback systems to enable that learning to take place. And that learning is not only the state, it's actually social learning of trying to sort of understand how these processes are taking place. And that's something that we're struggling with here, because you're looking at local adaptive practice and how that can be scaled in multiple ways. And because the social and economic and political processes are so complex, you can't really predict how they will play themselves out. So the only way that you can deal with that is by building enough resilience in the system and enabling enough redundancy and connectedness that that process can work very significantly. Another thing that I think Ravi alluded to is a lot of the infrastructure that we have that we need to build is yet to be built. Okay, and that has a dramatic impact on risk and vulnerability in the future, or exposure and vulnerability in the future. And I'll give you a classic example. When British railways were built in this country, their drainage management was excellent. If you go through any of the old alignments that are there, the railways have culverting all throughout, and you rarely have flooding in many locations. I mean, just giving you an anecdotal kind of thing. We have built over the last 30, 40 years a lot more rail lines. But flooding is endemic, and Andhra is a classic example, because we're not respecting the landscape effectively. But more than that, in a situation where the hydrology is going to shift, where both extreme events and the normal is going to shift, you really have to understand how that land and waterscape is going to function. And because you're making thousands of crores of investment in that, you have to be very careful that you not only understand today's landscape but the future. And that's where the linkage between science and planning and processes, because you can make a really bad investment and that can really put you in a very bad situation, not now, but over the next 30 or 40 years, and you're locked in. And because you're locked into that capital investment, there's very little that you can do to put it back. Bangalore, for example, has made a remarkable investment in a large airport, which is very far from the city, and it's hurting very badly because of that. Because the airport is in a direction which there's no water. And because the airport is there, it's drawing growth, massive amount of real estate growth, and you would have seen this coming in. But there is no water. It's sitting on a geological formation in which the water depths are 3 times they would be in other locations. So that's a classic example of a maladaptive activity. In the current context, it may be okay, but it becomes a severe maladaptation 20 or 30 years from now. So as we build out our infrastructure, as we actually start looking at these institutional systems, we do need to try and imagine how they may work. And of course, there are uncertainties and we'll make mistakes. But we have to build learning systems that can try and be careful. So the precautionary principle is quite difficult to apply. We don't teach it in our schools. But in practice, in development practice in everyday life, Indians are very good at doing that. I mean, so the question is, how do we build it into institutional frames? So I think if that's it, we can probably break for lunch. Thank you very much for having this sort of very wide-speaking panel. Pratigna has a couple of announcements.
Yeah, thank you, panelists, for the presentations. We've eaten, I think, 20 minutes into lunch already, so we might sort of push the lunch until 2:45. And then we already break into 3 panel discussions on 3 different venues. It will happen parallelly. The session that's happening on the ground floor is called Climate Change Impacts, Vulnerability and Adaptation. It will happen here. There's another panel on the second floor called Recent Advances in Climate Science. And on the third floor, where you met this morning, we have the session called Urban Climate Change Adaptation. So after lunch, we will directly convene in our respective panels. After which, after the panels, we come back here again for the closing plenary. Thank you.